Welcome to the Christian Dad Podcast. We are about progress, not perfection. We consistently take steps on our journey to be great Christian dads. There was only one perfect man, and it's not us. I am your host, Dan Lewigs, and my co-host, Evan Costello, is with us today. And we have a special guest for you, somebody who is truly special in my life, and as a matter of fact, in my family's life, as you guys are going to find out. We've got Dr. Brian Gosser. He's a medical doctor. He's an MD. He has a triple major in college. He majored in biology, theology, philosophy. He's an Army veteran, a father of 8. That's right, I said 8 children. And he's been married to Francie, from beginning to end. So the mother of all his children and his beautiful bride that he honors, respects, and adores. So I'm really excited to bring you this interview. We broke it into 2 parts. So overall, the theme is about God the Father and how we should imitate God the Father. And Brian's got 3 keys that he brings to us. One is God the Father is a protector. Number 2, God the Father is a disciplinarian. And number 3, God the Father is a humble leader. I also believe if we have those 3 things involved in our life and as philosophies that we use and look to get better at all the time, we'll be great dads. Like, those are pretty 3 simple keys that are fantastic. So in this episode, in part 1, we talk about some guy stuff. We talk about Cardinals Cubs. We talk about John Goodman. We also talk about Band of Brothers. So this one's pretty fun. Nice little intro. Part 2 dives into disciplinarian and humble leader. Part 1 dives more into the protector aspect. And then also at the end of part 2, we've got our weekly challenge. So I always like to have a challenge at the end of each podcast. So at the end of this episode, no challenge, but at the end of the second part, there is a challenge there. So encourage you guys to tune into this one. I hope you guys get as much out of it as I did, and check out part 2 for sure. Thanks, guys. Dr. Brian Gosser, we are so blessed to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm wondering who's the fantastic guest. I'm waiting to hear.
Well, that is you. That is you. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I'm honored to be considered that.
You have some gifts that I absolutely appreciate. You are absolutely humble. You are absolutely a unique person in life, willing to share your gifts. You have a incredible sense of humor, although odd, quirky, and
that's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me.
Comes out at some unexpected times. We have shared some intimate conversations over the years, and it's pretty amazing sometimes the humor you can bring into situations. So something I know about you is you are fun-loving and joyful and have a way of radiating that joy to others. So people that get to spend time with you are truly blessed.
Well, thanks. Quirky is the nicest way it's ever been put. My wife usually says I'm full of something, but she's not sure exactly what. But then again, she's married to me, so she knows the real deal, the real thing. She sees me at my worst always.
So I would like to start off. You've got a different background than almost anybody, you do have a different background than anybody out there, but from a professional job, as well as studies that you've done, you're so qualified in so many different ways to be here on the Christian Dad Podcast. So people have an idea.
Yeah. I am a medical doctor. I went to medical school at St. Louis University here in town. That's how I came to St. Louis. I'm originally from Chicago. Sad to say, I'm a former Cubs fan, but I had to become a Cardinals fan as part of the prenup agreement when I married a Kirkwood girl. I am the father of 8. I didn't birth any of them. I left that all to my wife. She's the more amazing one of the 2 of us. But in addition to the 8, we also have 5 in heaven. We've had 5 miscarriages in the mix, so that's been a part of our journey, a very difficult part of our journey. But I feel like I'm a better person and a better doctor because of those 5. I know they intercede for me and my family. I had a stint in the Army. I'm a former Army doctor. I was on active duty for 4 years after residency. So I have an appreciation of our freedom and the gift of our freedom that I think a lot of people don't have anymore these days. I'm very blessed, and in addition to being the scientist, I really felt like there's more to life than just science. When I was an undergrad, I decided to triple major in biochemistry, theology, and philosophy, just because, I was at a Jesuit school and I, wanted to pay more money. I think that was part of it. And I earned extra degrees, that you have to figure out what to do with. So, but here I am, and it turns out that God has taken those things and I hope brought some good use out of them, and hopefully today you can benefit from that as well.
So thank you for that intro. So you've got children ranging in many ages, all the way up to 22, I believe, age 22.
Yes, we have twin daughters that are going to be 23 in August, down to our youngest, Charlie, is going to be 9 on 4th of July. He was a 4th of July baby. We told him initially the fireworks were for him, and he still believes that, I think. The one thing, though, too, that I would say, Dan, I wanted to really make a disclaimer. There are some things that I am and some things I am not. I really do not claim to be a parenting expert. I question what we do all the time. One of the biggest things that I think is of value is to have that older brother in the Lord, somebody whose kids you admire, that you can go to and just say, hey, what would you do in this situation? It's not always clear cut, and there are not clear cut answers for most of the problems we face as parents. And so to have that resource person or a resource team, even where you got a couple of people that, the best way to find these people is look at their kids. They must have done something right to have good, godly kids that are still part of the church, kids that, are disciplined, kids that can, that are respectful. I mean, I come across people all the time that I look at them. I won't break HIPAA here, but I met a patient not too long ago that I could tell immediately she was a wonderful mom. And as she began to tell me her history, her parents were both drug addicts, and they had problems and this and that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, how in the world did this lady turn out okay? Well, as she explained, she had an aunt and uncle that were Pentecostal ministers that took in 4 other siblings or cousins or something. They were just wonderful people and gave her a sense of stability, and I mean, I would love to package what they did for her, but I mean, she came from such a messed up background that there was no way she was on track to be even a halfway decent person. And yet she's a fantastic lady. And, I think what we're talking about is impacting other people's lives. What does it take to really be an impact to someone? It's hard to package, or it's hard to fathom. But there are certain things, if we really boil it down, that it takes, and I'd like to go into some of those.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll interject slightly different. We had a member of our community. He sent me a note, and I'd like to read the note. I won't disclose his name because I didn't get permission to use it. But his note says, "My biggest challenge as a dad, husband, is making decisions. Being in charge of developing my family's faith life is the biggest task I could ever be given." I emphasize those words. Being in charge of developing my family's faith is the biggest task I could ever be given. So as Christian dads, that is our responsibility. He goes on to say, "My only true fear is not holding up my purpose. Is the example I'm setting what they should see? Do I practice what I, in parentheses, try to preach, etc. I feel like I'm a pretty good dad, but as Dan Lewis mentioned, only one perfect man ever, which means that I've got a lot to work on. So I loved what he had to say, and he understands the responsibility of it, and the prep work that you've done. You want me to call you Dr. Gosser or Brian?
Just call me Sir.
Sir, yeah, Sir Knight. we were talking baseball earlier, so funny story. I was on my way to Busch Stadium with a Christian youth group back when I was younger, and John Goodman, as he was gaining some celebrity, happened to be walking along a few paces in front of us, and this young girl says, "It's him. It's that guy from Roseanne." We didn't know his name, so they're like, "Somebody's got to talk to him or whatever." So we run up, and this girl goes, "Are you him? Are you really him?" And John Goodman, I kid you not, without missing a beat, goes, yes, I am him. I am Christ your Savior."
Out of fear of lightning bolts, I know I'm inside, but the lightning bolt can still come through this roof. I will never say that. Oh my golly.
It was the funniest thing. We went on to have a good conversation after that, and he invited us to have hot dogs with him in the bleachers and all that type stuff. But that was so funny that he was ready for that. So anyway, we might talk some baseball today. Who knows, folks? I got my Cardinals jacket on, and the World Series background is my screensaver. So, but yeah, having that sense of responsibility, and you really poured into thinking about things to talk about today to share with a Christian dad audience. So I'll kind of let you open up and take it.
Well, and as I was thinking about what to name this, I thought I took some inspiration from my now 18-year-old son. He was probably about 10 at the time, and he had wanted to do something that wasn't good for him. And I told him no, and I told him no, and I told him no. And finally I had worn him down to where he realized that he wasn't going to get his way on this. And he said to me, he's like, "Dad, you're the meanest dad in the whole world." I think he said that because he thought it was going to hurt me, right? I was overjoyed. I mean, I'm like, I was number 2 for the last 3 years running, and now you're telling me I finally jumped into first place. I mean, that's glorious in my mind. What I mean by that is, when we look at this, being a good dad, being the dad that our kids need, is not going to be a popular decision. It's going to challenge us down to our socks. It's going to take everything we have and then more. If I would encourage you, and I had some stuff here that I'm going to kind of skip over because I think it's not really necessary, but a great Bible study for you in your own free time, if you got some time this summer, on the family and fatherhood, would be to take a look at the book of Ephesians. It's 6 chapters. You can read through this thing in probably about 20 minutes. But it has lots of little gems in there. How we're called as God's chosen people, that God's desire is to be merciful to us. He desires mercy, not sacrifice, that our salvation is a result of God's grace, not because we earned it, but because he gives it to us freely. He welcomes us into his family. Whoever earned their way into a family, Dan, I don't know about your kids, but they didn't do anything to deserve to be in your family. Neither did my kids. And Evan's got a little girl on the way that's going to be welcomed into their family, and she's not done a thing to earn her way into a family. And that's the same thing with God's family. We can't earn our way into it. He welcomes us freely, and we're saved by grace. By grace alone, not faith alone, like Luther said, but grace alone. The Ephesians goes on. There's lots of little goodies in there. Ephesians 5 is the wives be submissive to your husbands, so make sure you get your wives on board with that. And then Ephesians 6 is, it's about not provoking your kids to anger and discipline, and the sword of the Spirit and the armor of God. So it's a great book. It's got so many good quality things. Paul really I think was having a good time with Ephesians. And it's something that really has something for everybody.
Yeah, I was
The
reading about
thing,
the armor of God just last night. So
yeah, yeah. So, for your own perusing, I think that would be a great study and adjunct to this. But the
absolutely.
thing we have to remember is we're soldiers in God's army, the armor of God. He gives us armor for a reason, because we're in his army. We're captains over our own family. Okay. And what stuck with me was there's a quote from Chesterton. It's the true soldier fights not because he hates what's in front of him, but because he loves what's behind him. We're not, nobody likes to be the meanest dad in the whole world, okay? But it's because I love them so much that I'm willing to be the jerk, the one that, why do you have to do this? Why can't you be like all the other dads? Well, because I'm not the parent of those other kids. I'm your parent. I'm responsible for you and how you turn out, not how they turn out. So there's always that little bit of animosity, and the whole thing about it is when we talk about being the kind of father that we're supposed to be, who are we supposed to imitate? When we think of it, God the Father, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the Trinity. I don't know that we relate to God the Father quite as easily. Jesus is so much more visible. He's on the cross. He's preaching. He's teaching. He seems so much more approachable. But the Father is the one that we're trying to understand, and that is compounded by the fact that some of us had a really difficult relationship with our own fathers.
Yes.
My dad was a recovering alcoholic. He was sober for 31 years before he died, but he, had his problems, and he and I had it out a couple of times, and there were some really hard feelings at certain points in our lives, and that made it more difficult. So, when we think of, how do we model our fatherhood on the fatherhood of God, that's our challenge. It's really challenging. How do we know him? Well, we get glimpses of it from Jesus, because, the Father pours himself into the Son. And all that Jesus says and does, it really echoes what the Father is doing and saying. In John 14:9, he who has seen me has seen the Father. The Father and Son have such an incredible unity that, when we look at Jesus, we're really seeing the Father. The Father is sacrificial. The Father has a heart for the poor. The Father, everything that you think of that's what Jesus stands for is in the Father, because they're so united. Okay. So the introduction, I would say, is, we're chosen and called and saved by God's grace. God is our Father, and he leads by example. We're to be imitators. And we have to remember that we're in a war. We are in a war. We're soldiers. We got that armor of God that Paul talks about in Ephesians. And, I just recently watched, I love watching Band of Brothers. I'm a Band of Brothers guy, and Easy Company and Major Dick Winters. That guy was just amazing. But where he's leading, he's like, "Come follow me, come on," and he commands such respect that you have nothing to do but run and follow him. You want to, because he's leading you in the right way. You can't stay where you are, or you're going to die. So I thought of that as kind of our start. We're living in a world full of lies, and that's part of the problem with what we've got. The world's telling our kids that life is fair, everything should be equal, or everybody deserves a trophy just for showing up, or your parents don't know anything, friends are where it's really at. And for fathers, sometimes I think what society teaches us is that all we're required to do is provide food, clothing, and shelter. That if you do that, then you're a good father. Well, no, I mean, I think that's really what is required to be a pet owner. If you got a dog and you provide food, clothing, and shelter, I mean, some of these little chihuahuas need clothing, okay, whatever. We have a Saint Bernard, a real dog, but she doesn't need any clothing, but she needs food and shelter. So my point is that I think the society talks about food, clothing, and shelter as being what's required to be a father, and it couldn't be farther from the truth. couldn't be farther from the truth. It also, society teaches us that our kids are so naive and innocent. The kids are watching and they're paying attention every second of every day. They watch everything that we do and listen to everything that we say. And that's good and that's bad. It's bad in the sense that every little screw up they see. However, those screw ups, when turned to good, or, those times where we blew it and we ask for forgiveness, they see that and they realize that we're genuine. Okay. If they see us, they're not going to believe a word we say if we're faking it. Okay. So the point is, and the three things, if I had to give you 3 points, that's what they always say, right? Have a good beginning, good end, and have 3 points in the middle and keep them as close together as possible. The 3 points would be, if we're going to follow what God does, God is a protector, God is a disciplinarian, and God is a humble leader. And if we can integrate those 3 things into our fatherhood, we're going to be doing some good. Okay. So let's try and tackle those one at a time. Let's talk about being a protector. I think about the Old Testament and Adam, our first father. Okay. He was kind of set up. He had life on easy street, right? Before the fall, I often wonder, how in the world, could he blow it? He had it so good. He had really one job, and it was to cultivate the garden, but to protect the garden. Okay, to protect it. So when you're charged with protecting the garden, there's got to be somebody that you got to protect it against, right? And so I think a lot of our modern books, our picture books, have these little snakes, whatever. If you look in the book of Revelation, the devil is portrayed as a huge dragon. I mean, this is a being that's formidable, not a little snake that you could just crush its head, unless you're the Blessed Mother, but that's a different thing. So this big dragon comes into the garden, and obviously Adam is afraid. Here's a test, and he's terrified. And what happens? We know what happens. He succumbs, and original sin occurs, and the relationship between God and human beings is ruptured, and they're cast out of the garden. Okay. Well, when we're sitting in our houses, we think that everything is well. Do we realize that our kids are in the next room getting murdered and beaten by the evil one? By pornography and chat rooms, and that our baby girls are being propositioned by lusting eyes and hands, that their hearts are being captured by material things that can never satisfy. Here we are thinking that we're doing a good job providing food, clothing, and shelter for them, and they're over here in total neglect. Because what they really need is not food, clothing, and shelter. What they really need is us. They need us involved and engaged with them. Okay? Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want them to be with us in heaven? I mean, this is a big question. It's a hard question. Well, the even bigger question is, do I want to be in heaven? Sometimes the way we act as parents doesn't really indicate that we want to be there. We want to please God without displeasing Him too much. We want to do our own thing and live a fairly holy life, but we're really not all too sure about going all in here. So the thing we got to remember is our salvation is not assured. I think this may be a point of contention with some of our Protestant brethren. A lot of them will think that, you pray the sinner's prayer and you're automatically going to heaven. Well, we talked about getting into the family. We didn't do anything to deserve getting into the family. And God welcomes us into the family, but we can leave the family by our own choice. God doesn't want us to leave, but we can repudiate everything. And I can say, I am no longer part of this family. I am out of here, like the prodigal son did. I mean, we could do that. So, our salvation is not assured, which is why, our good friend St. Paul says, work out your salvation in fear and trembling. Or, he talks about really living that Christian life and working out your salvation in fear and trembling, because it's not a sure thing. It's not for us, and it's not for our kids. So what are we going to do about it? You'll laugh. I had a story. I was in the car one time with my Timothy. He's 16 now. I think he was about 11 or 12 then at the time. And we're driving along. It was just he and I. I think I had dragged him to the hospital because I had to make rounds or something. And he was the only one that I could drag with me. So we're driving back home, and out of the blue, he just says to me, "Dad, do you think I'll be in heaven someday?" And of course, without batting an eyelash, I said, "Timothy, it's going to be close." And he just kind of stopped for a little bit. He's like, "Oh my God," And then he and I had a great laugh. And I said it in a joking way, but do we really realize, for all of us, it's going to be pretty close? It's going to be pretty close. I mean, let's not take any chances. Mother Angelica, the great quote of Mother Angelica was, "Please don't shoot for purgatory because you might miss."
Yes.
And
yes.
I thought, oh, wow, that's profound. Don't shoot for purgatory because you might miss. In the same way, what are we doing? What are we doing? Are we really going to go for this? I mean, are we really taking the sainthood thing seriously? I mean, are we just going to kind of mull around and maybe change our lives eventually when it gets convenient for us? Or are we really going to start living the way we should be living? I'm not saying this to convict anybody. I'm saying it to myself, because there have been times where I know if I'm really honest, I'm not trying my best. And is God worthy of my best? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm called to greater holiness constantly and convicted. And that's what
I had that question in my mind years ago. And, if somebody like used to say, what do you want to know or whatever, or if I was your son, "Hey, Dad, how do I get to heaven?" And the real, in parentheses, part was, what's the bare minimum?
Yeah. Yeah.
And like a high jumper, what do I need to do to clear whatever, 6 foot, 7 foot? Well, if I'm training to only clear that and I miss just by a fraction, there's some pretty big repercussions for missing. So instead of how do I just barely get over the bar, different question. What's the most I can do?
Right.
What's the
right? Well, it's when you think of it,
can I clear the bar?
Right. What has God done for you, and what is your response? It's most of the time my response is pathetic. I'll admit it's pathetic. But you know what? When it comes to high jumping, I'm a little heavy on my feet. So, however, I'm going to get a leg transplant. I'm going to get like springy legs, and I'm going to be able to jump. Instead of it'd be more like pole vaulting, only it'd be high jumping. That's how springy my legs are going to be. It's going to be cool, but we'll get back to you on that.
All right. So that was the end of part 1 on the interview with Dr. Brian Gosser. Hopefully you guys love that. We really got to dive into being the protector of our families. We got to talk about Adam, and his one job was just to protect the garden. You had one job, man, and you blew it. And then the rest of the story happens from there. So part 2 coming up. Again, we'll dive into disciplinarian, we'll dive into humble leader. It'd be great if you guys enjoyed this and you'd like to continue the conversation. Drop your thoughts into Facebook page, The Christian Dad. And if you'd like to invite some of your friends, some of your brothers, some of your people in life that you value what they think, invite them into the group. Love to have them in the Christian Dad group. Feel free and share this podcast with them as well. So thanks, guys, for tuning in, and look forward to getting your thoughts on the part 2 as well.